Welcome to JavaScript 1. Okay, today we're going to be going over variables, arrays, objects, functions, and at the end of this module, you'll be able to use function, declarations, expressions, and arrow functions and describe their differences. You'll be able to use let, const, and var and demonstrate their differences, create and use object literals, as well as describe object properties and methods, and create and use arrays as well as array property and methods. So this is a lot of stuff that we're covering today, but this is the fundamentals of JavaScript. All right, so I've given everyone a link to CodePen. You'll notice that it's totally blank. That's because we're gonna write some JavaScript from scratch today. So I'm going to just like minimize my CSS and just bring my JavaScript all the way up here. In CodePen, you have this thing down here called a console. So if you click on that, this is where we're actually going to see all of our JavaScript today. So it's in the console, and sometimes we even need to open up the console in our browser because sometimes CodePen's console is not good enough. So to do that, you want to right-click and hit Inspect. And we've been using this Inspect tool for a couple weeks now, so you should be a little bit familiar with it. But this is where we find all of our HTML. This is where we find all of our CSS. And then if we click on console, you can ignore these errors for now, but this is where we would find all of our JavaScript. Okay? So that is where you want to debug when we're working with JavaScript. All right. So first I'm going to show you in HTML if I wanted to, so I'm just going to close this for now. In HTML, if I wanted to see something, I would just type it in here and I would type hello world, and that shows up like really easily right here. In JavaScript, if I wanted to do the same thing, I could write var hello equals hello world. Okay, and then how would I get this to show up? So how do we see things in JavaScript? How would I see that hello world? I'm going to put a thread here. Does anyone have an idea how I would see this? Yeah, great. Console.log. So we want to console.log things. So I'm going to delete this so that it doesn't confuse anyone. I'll move this back up. And if we click on the console here, this is where we want to see the JavaScript. So we type console.log, and then we call our variable name, which is hello. And if we console.log hello, we get hello world. So good, that's working. So we can console.log something to show it up, to have it show up in the console. So this is a method, and it's used for debugging purposes. And you're going to get really familiar with that over the next week. So the console, this whole console, and the one in our inspector tools here, it exists just for debugging purposes, just so that, close all of this, just so that developers can debug. So we're never going to like write a bunch of data in the console or a bunch of sales information in the console or anything that's like customer facing. We'll never be writing that in the console. This exists solely so that developers have a tool to debug their code. All right, so first things first, I'm gonna go into the behaviors in my CodePen, and I'm gonna turn off this auto update. Otherwise we're gonna get a bunch of errors. And I'm going to turn this off too. So now I actually have to save and run. And I can clear my console for now. All right, so the console is going to be full screen as well, because this is where I'm going to be looking for my code today. So you probably want to set up your CodePen to look like this. So we have just our JavaScript that we're working out of and just the console on this side, because that is where we're actually going to see all of our code. And I'll go through those behaviors one more time. So if you click on settings, and you click on behavior, you want to turn off the autosave and you want to turn off the auto updating preview. And that's just because otherwise CodePen will try and update too frequently and you might not actually be finished writing your code by the time it tries to like update and autosave, and then it'll just start throwing you errors So we only want to run the code when we hit this run button. So that's why I'm doing that. All right, let's start with variables today. So first of all, what is a variable? We talked about this a little bit last week when we were talking about pre-processing. So there's a thread here in WEB23. So tell me, what is a variable? In your own words, what is a variable? A named pointer, something that stores a value. Yeah, a container, a thing for storing a value. Yeah. I like to think of a variable as like a jar, and I put in a piece of information inside that jar, and then I can store that jar up on a shelf or something like that and retrieve that information or pull that information back when I need it. So it's a piece of information that we can store and retrieve later. And we've got a couple different ways that we can define variables. So hopefully you've watched the videos in the training kit, but we have 3 ways that we can define a variable with var, let, and const. And there's a couple of differences in each, so we'll go over those. So JavaScript is compiled a little bit differently than less. So last week we were talking about less, and it was compiled like this. So we had less, and then less was compiled into Node, and then, and I'm just going to put this in comments so it doesn't give us an error. Less was compiled into Node, and then Node was compiled into CSS. And we had to type a code in our terminals to get that to work. What was the thing we had to type into our terminals? I'm just going to put a thread here in WEB23. So what was the thing that we had to type into our terminals to get our less to compile into CSS? What was that command? Yeah, awesome. So we had to type less -watch -compiler, and you had to spell compiler correctly. And then you had to type less CSS index .less to get this to happen. With JavaScript, we are compiling our code at runtime. So this means the browser runs our code, and we call it just in time. Okay, so the browser runs our code at runtime, and that's called just in time. So JavaScript compiles just in time. So when we run our code, this app, CodePen, is utilizing our computer's hardware to run through and build our code. So we don't have to run any special command in the terminal. It runs our code automatically. Okay, so we aren't going to get into compiler theory right now or anything, but I just want you to know that JavaScript is running these things in the browser. And that's why it can be so costly to user experience if we don't write efficient JavaScript. Okay, JavaScript runs on what's called a 2-pass compiler. On the first pass of the compiler, we're trying to set up a reference. So let's set up a reference. Let's make a variable. We're going to call the variable var test, and we're going to set it equal to testing our var. Okay, and we'll put a semicolon here. So side note, semicolons are not needed 95% of the time in JavaScript, but it's really good practice to use them so that they are in place when we need them for that 5%. So after you're finished writing a command, you would put a semicolon. So in CSS, we noticed that if we forgot semicolons, things would break. So in JavaScript, they're not needed 95% of the time, but good practice would be to write those semicolons. All right, so I set my var test equal to testing our var. Who knows what this piece of data here is called? I'm just going to drop a thread here in WEB23, and who can tell me what this piece of data is called? Whoops. There you go. Yeah, perfect. It's called a string. Yeah, so it's set to a string. All right, so let's see if this thing works. So how would I get this thing working? How would I test to see if this var is working? Go ahead and answer. There's another thread in there. Yeah, okay, console.log. And what am I console.logging? Write out the whole line for me. Perfect. Gavin's got it. So we're going to console.log, and we're going to call the name of the variable, which is var test. And you'll notice that capitalization does matter here. Okay, so now I'm going to save and run, and I should get testing our var. So this is working now. All right. Okay, so let's slow down for a minute here and let's see what's going on. So var is a special keyword that is understood by the JavaScript compiler. The var is doing something. It's basically storing our string for later. So if we didn't have this var keyword, would this still work? I'm gonna put another thread here in WEB23. What do you think? And I don't want you to run the code. I just want you to tell me, like, what do you think? Would this still work if I didn't have that var keyword? Some people are saying no, some people are saying yes. I'll wait until a few more people vote here. Default is var, some people are saying no. Okay, let's try this. Let's take away this var keyword, and we're gonna clear the console. We're gonna save and run. And it's still working. Testing our var is still working. Okay, so it still works. Why does it still work? Go ahead and reply in that same thread. Why do you think this is still working? It's global. Yeah, the global variable. So hopefully you guys got that by watching your video. So this is super dangerous because there's no error here. There's nothing stopping us from doing this. So this is called the global variable, and we want to avoid these. So don't do this, okay? This thing called a variable definition, var, is where we define the variable and then we give it a name that we can reference later. We always want to make sure that we have a variable definition in the front. We don't want to just have a global variable, okay? That makes things really messy for later. So another thing I want to talk about here is this operator right here. So you've probably read this in maths your whole life as equal to. So var test is equal to testing our var. I want you to stop thinking like that. I want you to start thinking in terms of assigning the value of. Because actually we are using something else for equals or is equals to. So in that case, we would do either 3 or 2 equal signs as something is equals to. So 3 equal signs is testing for truthiness. Whereas a single equal sign is assigning the value of. So let's get that out of the way now and start saying assigning the value of, okay? All right. Another thing I want to go over here, as we discussed earlier, this variable is assigned to a string, but we can assign anything we want to a variable in JavaScript. So JavaScript is loosely typed, and this means we don't have to declare what the type of the thing is. So in other languages, sometimes you would have to do something like this, var testing string, and then you could only assign this a string. So in JavaScript, we don't need to do that. We don't have to declare the type. So we can change this. Let's change it below. We're going to say var test equals, and let's assign it a number. We'll say 4. Okay, so now if I save, clear, and run, we can see that var test is now equal to 4. So that's a number, not a string. So it's a totally different variable type. Something else interesting also happened here. Who can tell me what else happened here? So we've changed it to a number, but like what happened here? What is that called when I changed the variable here? Does anyone know what else happened here? Yeah, I overwrote it, or it was overridden. It's mutable, yep. So I was able to reassign the value of the variable below it. So notice that var test is assigned a new value now. That's because var test, and I can do it as well without this reference to var. So if I save this and I clear, save, run, so it's still assigned to 4. So I could do that with or without the var keyword. So var test was declared once, and now I can reassign the value of var test without the keyword. So this is something we need to be careful with. So in JavaScript, we need to remember as humans, like what we wrote earlier, so we don't override it. There are tools and libraries out there to do this, by the way. So TypeScript, for example, that allows us to protect ourselves from ourselves. And I would definitely encourage you to Google that after this guided project. Okay, so what happens if I try to console log var test before I declare my variable? So let me put another thread here in WEB23. Okay, so what if I tried to move this console log up here? Let me just take this away so it doesn't confuse us. What's gonna happen? And don't run it, just tell me, like, what do you think is gonna happen? Am I gonna get an error, or am I gonna get 2 results? Okay, some people are saying type error, some people are saying undefined. It should still work. Okay, let's try and run it and see what we get. Undefined and testing our var. Interesting. So the first one says undefined. The second one is running our code. So what do we think is going on here? Let me add another thread in here. What do we think is going on here? Okay, some people are saying scope. Some people are saying variable not hoisted, cascading. The compiler is running the code. Okay, so undefined is a good thing. It's not an error. It means that we've made a mistake somewhere. So JavaScript didn't make the mistake. So when you see undefined, that's a good thing. That means that, you know, you've made a mistake somewhere. So var test is actually hoisted, but what's hoisted? What's hoisted here? Go ahead and tell me what you think is hoisted here. I'll put another thread in here. So var test is hoisted, but what is actually hoisted here? Yeah, perfect. So the variable is hoisted, but not the value. So the left side is hoisted, and we see proof of that when we see this undefined, okay? So this undefined is proof that there's more stuff going on under the hood here. So what this means is that JavaScript is making an assignment first, okay? So on the first pass of the compiler, JavaScript is making a reference. It grabbed var test. It recognized the reference at the top of the stack, and it put it at the top of the stack here. So on the first pass of the compiler, it grabs a reference. And on the second pass, it's looking for values. So on the second pass here, like after we've defined our variable, we can see testing our var, and it's assigned the value, okay? The problem is it didn't know what to do in this. It didn't know what to do up here because it hadn't been assigned a value yet. So undefined doesn't just magically happen. It's that we're missing something in our code. So if you see undefined, that's a good thing. That means that you've made an error somewhere. So this is kind of cool. When JavaScript goes and sets up all the references, it assigns undefined to everything. So seeing undefined, yeah, this is a good thing, okay? And when JavaScript runs in the compiler, on the first pass, it tries to set up references. On the second pass, it sets up those values. So I keep repeating this, but it's really important. So on the second pass, it found testing our var. And here it is in the console. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So first pass references, second pass values. So with that knowledge, understand that every variable, var, let, and const, they're all hoisted inside of the scope in which they belong. Okay, so before we go any further, I want to talk to you about a block of scope. So this is a block of scope. I want you to think of everything outside of this block of scope as being global. Okay, it's global. It exists in the world. Think of this block of scope as like a piece of the world, and we can think of that as a country. Okay, and inside of a country, we may have a province, and inside a province, we may have a municipality. Oops. And inside of a municipality, we may have like individual towns or cities. Okay, each of these scopes, they have their own rules, their own governments telling them what they can and cannot do. Okay. Yeah, so each of these has its own rules. So we're going to come back to this again and again, even tomorrow, but I want you to think of scope as stuff that's inside of these curly braces. Okay, so if I came into the country and I said, like console log var test, would this work? So will this work in the local scope? What do you think? I'm gonna pop a thread here in WEB23. What do you think? Will this var test, if I console.log this here, so console.log var test, will this work in the local scope? Yes. A lot of people are saying yes. Some people are saying no. Okay, let's clear. We'll take this out. Save and run. Testing our var. It's working. Awesome. So why did it work? So it is working. That's good. Why did it work? Who knows the answer to that? Why did it work? What do we think? Okay, define globally. Okay, so the reason it can work is because var is accessible on the global scope, meaning that anything inside of our curly braces can see outside. So var is accessible on the global scope. So what happens if I move var test inside of those curly braces? So I'm going to take this and move it inside of these curly braces. And I move the console log down here outside of these curly braces. So now what do we think will happen? So I'm going to pop a thread here in WEB23. So now what do we think will happen? Okay, some people are saying it won't run. Some people are saying undefined. Okay, let's test this out and see. Save, run. Ooh, look, it's still working. Testing our var is still working. Okay, so that's interesting. So var is uninhibited by these curly braces. So that brings us to one of the biggest differences between let and var. So now let me introduce you to let. All right, so let's make a new variable here, and we're going to call this let test equal, and we'll say testing our let. Okay, and we're going to console.log this to make sure it's working. Okay, so we can clear, save, and run. Okay, so testing our let, testing our var. So they're both working. So what's the difference here? Because these look identical, except for that keyword. So who knows the difference between var and let? What's different? go ahead and reply to that thread. Okay, yep, perfect. You can't have two lets. Let is block scope, awesome. You guys did your homework. So there are some differences here. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. Let's take that let and pop it outside of the scope and see what happens. So I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna pop it down here and let's see what happens. So we'll clear, save, and run. Testing our var. Okay, and then nothing else ran after that. So here's where things get interesting. Here's where we need to actually use the inspector because CodePen's console is not giving us enough information here. So I'm gonna inspect element. I'm gonna go to the console and I can see here it says reference error, let test is not defined. All right, interesting. So in this case, let test is not defined. This is because of a thing called block scope. So remember how we talked about countries? So in this case, the country is preventing let from leaving the country. So it's limited by this block of scope. It's limited by these curly brackets. All right, so let's write some notes here because we see some significant differences. So I'm gonna write some notes. I'll write them down here. And this is important, so you probably wanna write these notes too. Okay, so we'll say var, and actually I'm gonna write these comments. So they look like CSS comments, but if we're writing multi-line comments in JavaScript, we use what looks like CSS comments. Okay, so I'm gonna say var is, and let's say function scoped. And we'll talk about this in a minute. So we'll just put a star beside that. We'll talk about what that means in a couple minutes. Okay, it can be reassigned. Okay, and it can also be redefined. Okay, that's pretty crazy, and we'll talk about this in a minute too. So we'll put another star beside that. All right, we'll say let is, so let is block scoped. Okay, the value, oops, we'll put a bullet point there. The value is mutable. So this means it can be reassigned. Okay, we're just using some fancy terminology here. So the value is mutable, it can be reassigned, and it cannot be redeclared. All right, so I'm gonna leave these up for a second. I suggest you definitely write these comments too. It's good to have these notes, okay? So I'll leave those up for a moment. Okay, so with var, we can redeclare our value, and it's as if the first value didn't even exist. So you remember we reassigned it to a number, and it's as if the first value didn't even exist. So that's how crazy var is. With let, we can't rewrite it. So what I mean by that is if I say let test equal, I'm a new test. Okay, and then we took this console.log and we put it here. You can just comment this out for now. We're gonna clear, save, and run. We're getting an error here again. Nothing's happening here. So let's open up that other inspector again. We'll go to the console. And it says let test has already been declared. So we can't redefine it, or we can't redeclare it. So that means we can't make a mistake and rewrite it. If I forgot that let test was a name that I had already given another variable, it's not going to let me redeclare it. It's going to tell me that there's an error there. Okay, so it can't be redeclared. However, we can like redefine it. So it is mutable. So if I said let test equals, I'm a new test, that's fine. We can leave it like that. And we save and run. We see I'm a new test. So it can be reassigned. It is mutable, but it cannot be redeclared. Does everyone see the difference between that? I'm gonna put a I'm gonna put a thread here. Just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Do you see the difference when I say it can be declared slash reassigned? Okay, good. Awesome. So we're all on the same page here. Okay. So we didn't redeclare it. If we tried to redeclare it, we got an error, but we can reassign it. Okay, there's one more variable type we're missing, and that variable is const. So I'm just going to type it in here. So we'll comment this out. We can delete this. And it looks like this, const. And it stands for like consonant or constant. So const, let const equal, and we'll assign it to a string that says testing our const. Okay, so it performs basically the exact same thing as let. So let me just copy and paste these notes here. Okay, so we can just, we'll put another space here. We'll just change this to const is, but there's one difference between let and const, and who knows what that one difference is. I'm gonna put a thread in here. Who knows that one difference between let and const? Const is mutable, not mutable. Const is immutable, perfect. Okay, so that means the value here cannot be redeclared, or sorry, cannot be reassigned. So const is immutable. Okay, so let's clear this, and we'll console.log this const to make sure it's working. So console.log, and we're gonna say, whoops. Let const, okay. Let's save and run. Okay, so it says testing our const, perfect. But we can't reassign it. So if I said let const equal, I'm a new const. And we cleared this, and we save, and we run. Nothing's showing up here. Let's check our other inspector, our other console. It says type error, assignment to constant variable. All right, so here we get a type error. It's saying with this type of variable, it's already assigned. You can't assign it to a new variable. Okay, so it's immutable, and it also cannot be redeclared. Okay, so best practice moving forward is to always use a const until you can't, and then use let, but never use a var. So your new variable overlord is const. So you're gonna follow that until you cannot follow it anymore. Okay. Last quick thing before we take some questions and we take a break. If we tried to console.log outside of these curly braces, we're gonna get the same error as let, that const isn't defined. So it's living inside this scope of our country. So again, that's block scope. So every time you see curly braces, I want you to think block scope. So nothing is going to get out of there. If it's a let, if it's or a const, that's actually a really comforting thought. So that means like we have this scope, this block scope that will contain our code. So that's a really comforting thought. So let and const cannot escape this scope. Var, on the other hand, works globally, so things can get out of control really quickly with var. So we need to control var. And how would we control var? So I like to think of a function as a guard, and it doesn't let var out of the country. Okay, so let's write a function, because that's the next thing we're going to talk about anyway. So I'm going to comment some of this stuff out. Okay. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to write a function. And I'm going to call this function stop var. And I'm going to give it some parentheses and some curly braces. And this is probably starting to look a little bit familiar because we did something that was similar to a function in pre-processing. Okay, so let's write a variable inside of this function, and we can call this variable let me escape. And we'll set it equal to I want out. Okay. So let's console.log this inside of the function. Let me escape. Me has to be capital. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen here? Will it show up? If I console.log this inside of the function, what do you think is going to happen here? Go ahead and tell me in that thread. Yes, yes, it will show up. Yes. Okay, let's try it here. So we save, and run. Nothing's working here. What am I missing? What do I have to do here to get this to work? Why didn't this work? I'm going to post another thread in here. I'm missing something. Someone said it will run, it will not show up. What am I missing here? Call the function, invocation. Yes, I need to invoke the function. So we didn't call the function. And the fancy word for calling functions is invoking it. So I need to invoke the function down here. So to invoke the function, I call the function by its name. I say stop var. Okay, so this is invoking the function. Okay, so now if I save and run, I should see I want out. Perfect. So that is called invoking the function. Okay, so it cannot escape. Why? So this stop var is keeping this inside of the function. It can't escape. So if I just took this out here and I tried to console.log, here, I'll actually write that. I'll comment this out and write it underneath. So if I tried to just, and I'm just going to show you this so that you know I'm not lying to you. If I tried to console.log, let me escape here. Let me escape. Okay, and I cleared this, and I save, and I run. Okay, it's not being let out. It can't escape. So why can't it escape? What's happening here? So remember, if we go back up to our notes, var is function scoped. Okay, so it can't escape the function. So the function will keep var contained. So it cannot escape the function. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a moment, and I'm going to answer some questions because I'm sure there's some. I thought JavaScript was interpreted and not compiled. What's the difference? Doesn't matter. Hold that thought. We're going to talk about that a little bit more after the break, and I actually have a really great article that I'm going to share with you, okay? So when you use let const var and reassigning is using the variable name and reassigning it, I'm not sure what you're trying to ask here. That doesn't really make sense. So when you use let constant var and reassigning is using the variable name and reassigning it. So let's go back to our notes here. So var, it can be reassigned and it can also be redefined. Let, it can be reassigned, but it cannot be redefined or redeclared. And const, it cannot be reassigned or redeclared. Okay, so I hope that makes more sense to you now. All right, In what cases can we not use const anymore? So if for some reason you did need to reassign your variable at one point, that would be one case where you couldn't use const anymore. Pretty much, I wouldn't worry about the what if scenarios. Like, you will come across it and know when you can't use const anymore, and in that case you'll use a let. All right. Your CodePen does not have a save button, so then you need to go and turn off, you did turn off autosave. I'm not sure. Maybe try to open a new CodePen. Yeah, maybe just try to open a new CodePen. I mean, we're not doing anything that you would need the regular code for, because we're writing everything from scratch. So you can just write a new CodePen if yours isn't, or open up a new CodePen if yours isn't working. If var is a special keyword, why are we able to name the var test? Because var test and var is not the same word. Var test has 4 extra letters attached to the end of it, and it just views it as a totally different word. So that's why. All right, is redefining and redeclaring the same thing? I'm glad you asked. That's a great question. So redefining would be, so for example, if I wanted to, let's uncomment this again. If I wanted to redefine var test, I would say var test, and then I would set it to, I'm a new test, okay? And if I console.log var test here, we can just get rid of this. We can save and run. I'm a new test, okay? That's reassigning. Redefining would be saying var test equals I'm a new test. So we can clear this, save, and run. And for var, that works, because for var, it can be reassigned and it can also be redefined. For let, it can be reassigned, but it cannot be redeclared or redefined. So for let, if we said let test equal I'm a new let test, that's where we would get an error, because we can't redeclare it. But if we just said let test equal I'm a new let test, then it would be okay, because we're not redeclaring it, we're just reassigning it. So that's the difference between the two. And for const, you can't reassign or redeclare. So, all right. Const is mutable. Can we specify the difference between immutable? So const is not mutable, meaning it cannot be redefined or redeclared. So I hope that answers your question now. Okay. I'm not going to respond to rude comments like that. Why does redeclaring and reassigning matter? So I think we've talked about this a few times now, but redeclaring and reassigning matters in case you want to give that variable a new value. Okay, so block scope and function scope seem similar. They are similar. Yes, they are similar. When using let, is there a reason the initial declaration would not be used again? I'm not sure what you're asking here. Okay, would let test, I'm a new let, be a global variable? No, it would not be a global variable. Okay, could you do something like const name equals hello, let const name equal hello world? Yes. Sorry, no, you can't, because it cannot be redefined. So first of all, you don't want to have a global variable, so you're never just going to say const name const name equals hello without declaring it, and then it can't be redeclared. So you couldn't then reassign it a new value or redeclare it and give it a new value. Okay, we're going to stop here. I'll go on timer tab. Okay, I'll give you a 5-minute break, and I'll see you again in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back, WEB23. So next we're going to talk about functions. So let's pull up our code pen again. So in JavaScript, functions are considered to be first-class citizens, meaning that functions, they're just as important as objects, whereas in other languages, functions are not. So they can be passed around, and we are going to see tomorrow that we can even pass a function as a parameter. So first off, what is a function? And in your own words, tell me what you think a function is. So I'm just going to pop a thread in there. So what do you think a function is? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we've got a couple answers going on here. I'll just wait until everyone else. Awesome. Yeah, so these are all good answers. So this guard statement, like that it guards var, this really helped me. Because basically functions, they protect a block of code until they are invoked. So that's a really good way to think about functions. They protect a block of code until they are invoked. And there's different types of functions and different use cases for functions. So I want to talk about 3 different types of functions. The first one is a function declaration, and that's what we've just written. So what I've done is I've declared a function, and then I've written out my function here. Okay, so let's see if I can reference this. I'm going to take my invocation and I'm going to put it up here. So if I say stop var, okay, and can I reference a function before I declare a function? What do you guys think? Let me pop a thread here in WEB23. What do you think? Can I reference a function before I declare it? Will this work? All right, a lot of people are saying yes, I think so, maybe. All right, let's try it. Oh, let's go up and comment this code. Out here, clear, save. I'm just going to comment this out for a moment. Save, run. Okay, so if I don't console log, I can't see it inside of here, but I can, if I do console log, then I can see it. Then I can see that it's working here. Okay, yep, I want out. So we can reference a function up here before we call it. Okay, there's another way that we can like get our function to give us something back. And it's a special keyword. So what is the keyword that we could use to get our function to give us something back? Does anybody know what keyword I'm referring to? Awesome. Yeah, the return keyword. Great. So I could say here, it would look like this. Return, let me escape. Okay, and now if I wanted to invoke this function, how would I do that? How would I invoke the function now? So let me write a thread here. So how would I get this function to show up now in the console? How would I get it to invoke? Okay, close. Yep. Robert's got it. Awesome. Yeah, so I would console.log this stop var. So console.log and stop var, and I need those parentheses. Okay, so save and run. I want out. Okay, so we can see that it's working here. Okay, so in this case, stop var actually works because what happens here is in the compiler, in this case, the reference to stop var is actually being brought to the top of the scope, okay? So this bringing to the top of the scope is called two-pass compilation. So I actually do have a great article on how this stuff works if you're interested and you want to dig more deeply into this. So there was a question in Slido earlier, and I said, hold that thought. So I'm going to share this article with you. We're not going to go through it now just because we don't have a ton of time to get too deep into this stuff. But if you're more interested in how this compiler works, like spend some time going through this article. It's pretty interesting. Okay. Awesome. So I've shared that article with you. I've got a couple of other articles that I'm going to share with you in a minute too. So on the first pass, the compiler is looking for references. On the second pass, it's looking for values. So on the first pass, it tries to find the reference, or it tries to find where stop var is referenced, okay? So the cool thing about functions is that they are just placeholders for the stuff inside them. So it actually makes sense that stop var was brought up here first by the compiler. So it's as if it's already existed. And then once we console logged the reference, it went inside of the function and did all of this stuff, and it gave us this result. Okay, I'm going to bring up this article here on hoisting. Again, we're not going to spend too much time on this in the lecture, but I'm going to share this with you. Okay, this MDN docs, these people are kind of like the official documentation on JavaScript. So MDN, Mozilla, they probably have the best documentation on JavaScript. So when you're looking up JavaScript terminology and JavaScript things, I would always try and reference these MDN docs first. So this is a doc about hoisting and what hoisting is, okay? So I would give this a read as well if you're still kind of unclear about how all of this stuff is working. All right, so just a note, even though hoisting does exist, it's better practice to like console log something after. So down here, okay? So this just makes your code more readable, because if you have a bunch of console logs at the top of your code, then someone's got to go through your code and try and like find what the reference is and read through all of your code to like really understand what's going on. So a better practice would be to just console.log down here, not at the very top of your code, even though it is hoisted, okay? So it takes variables and functions and brings each of them to the top of their respective scopes. So notice I just said respective scopes. So that means that var is stuck inside of this scope until we return it. So if we didn't have the return keyword here, it wouldn't be able to get out, okay? So scope is a big deal. Like these curly braces, these are a big deal in JavaScript, okay? It's also why it's important not to use globals, because globals can be referenced by any function. So if all of our variables were global and we forgot their names, for example, we could quickly like mess things up in our code, okay? This is a super new concept, so I just want to provide one more resource on it. So let me pop this into Slack as well. Okay, and that's this resource here. So understanding local versus global JavaScript variables. So it definitely took me a while to understand this stuff when I was first learning. So take some time and read through these articles, and they will probably help you get a better understanding of what's going on here, okay? All right. So in this case, the function declaration is hoisted to the top of its scope. Let's talk about this return keyword for a minute. So the return keyword returns something back to us wherever it was invoked. So this return keyword returns something back to us wherever it's invoked. So in this case, we invoked stop var when we called stop var, and stop var said, I'm going to return this variable to you inside of this function, okay? Let's do another example. One that's probably more likely to occur in the real world. And actually, I'm going to let you guys do this as a breakout because I want you to get practice writing a function. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and I want you to create a function called add that returns 2 values that we can add together. So let me put the instructions here. I'm just going to send you, you can do it just in this code pen underneath this function. Okay, so in your code pen, and I'm going to send you to breakout rooms here. Breakout rooms, okay. You all have an invite to a breakout room now. I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes to create a function called add that returns 2 values that we can add together. All right, so go ahead and try that. Share your screens and try it out together. All right, we'll just wait for everybody to get back in here. How many of you were able to write that function? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on this thread. Okay, quite a few thumbs ups, that's good. There might be some shy thumbs downs, so we'll just wait until everybody gets back in here and then we'll do it together. All right. Okay, let's do this together. Okay, so I'm going to comment this out so it doesn't bother anything. All right, so we have to create a function. And let me just make sure I'm spelling this right. Okay, and we're going to call this function add, and we're going to add our parentheses and then open and close our curly brackets. And we want this function to take parameters. So we're going to give it num1 and num2. And we're going to return num1 plus num2. Okay, so now we can see how return statements are even more powerful because they can return something that's being operated on. So when we're performing math, that's called performing an operation. We're performing, or we're returning something that's being operated on. Okay, so we're gonna invoke here, and I need to add these things together. So I'm going to console.log add, and then I need to pass it some arguments. So let's say 2 and 4. Okay, so let's clear, save, and run. And we get 6. So we can see that it's working. Okay, so I want to make a couple notes here. So these things here are called parameters. These are not arguments. I just want to be super clear. Parameters are placeholder values, and it does not matter what we call them. Arguments are the actual values that we pass into the parameters, okay? So the 2 numbers are called arguments, and these placeholders here are called parameters. So I used to get really confused with that, so I just want to make that super clear. So some of you are probably already getting this, and you're thinking like, okay, this is boring, move on. But this trips a lot of people up. So I want to make that super, super clear. I think it's really important to have a solid understanding of these fundamentals, because then you will be in a great place when you get to advanced JavaScript and you get to React. So those of you who already know this, just bear with me. I just want to make sure the whole class is on the same page. So parameters are placeholder values, and we can call them anything. And the only thing that matters is the order. Arguments are the things that we pass in to the parameters, like in the place of the parameters, okay? All right, so JavaScript doesn't care what we pass in as arguments. So what if I put 2 strings here instead of these numbers? Like what if I put JavaScript and let's put is fun, okay? So now I'm gonna clear, save, run, and I have JavaScript is fun. I can even put a space after JavaScript. Let's clear, save, run. All right, and we can see here that JavaScript even respects that white space. Okay, so this plus sign, it can add things together, but it can also do something called concatenation. And that is when you're putting strings together or 2 values together, okay? All right, so we've talked about function declarations. We know that these are arguments, that these are parameters, and that the return keyword is returning something back to the invocation, okay? What happens if I write code after my return statement? Will it work if I write something after my return statement? I'm going to put a thread in here. Tell me what you think. No. Why not? Why don't you think that something is going to work afterwards? All right, let's try it. Let's write console.log. Is this working? Okay, let's comment this out. Okay, let's invoke the function down here. We'll give it numbers 2 and 4. Okay, so there's no tricks here. Clear, save, run. Okay, it doesn't look like anything's working here. Okay, nothing's working. So the answer is no. So it terminates. So the return statement is terminal, and it means that it does not allow anything to run after it. Or once return has been declared, nothing after it is going to work. So it just kills any code written afterwards. So it's important to remember this, because as you can see, we're not getting an error here. It just won't work. So you're wondering why this is working, is not showing up. Like, there's no error. Why isn't this working? And that you just have to remember that, because there's no error. So if at some point this happens to you, and it will happen 1, 2, 10, 50 times. It will happen in your career. Just double check that nothing is written after the return statement. So that's really important. So you might want to make a note of that because it will happen to you at one point or another, I promise. All right. So I'm just going to write a note here. So cannot write code after the return. All right. So let's comment this out. So now we're going to talk about something called function expressions. And function expressions are interesting in that we can actually bring back our friends var, let, and const. So what I mean by this is that we can actually house functions inside of variables. All right, so let's see this in action. Remember that we want to use const until we can't, and then we would use let. So let's say const, and we can call this function expression test, and let's set it equal to test. Okay, so this is what we expect a variable to look like. Okay, but we can replace this string with actual functions, which is pretty cool. So first of all, let's just make sure this is working. Console.log. I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to type it out again. Okay. Save. Run. Test. Perfect. All right. So here's where it gets a little crazy because we know it's going to be a function because we've already named it here. We don't have to rename it again. So we don't have to do this. Const function expression test equals function. I'm just gonna, we don't have to do this. We don't have to declare the function here. So does anyone know what it's called when we don't give a function a name? Let me pop this into WEB23. Does anyone know what that's called when we don't give a function a name? Yeah, it's anonymous. It's an anonymous function. So it just goes straight into the invocation of the block of code. So a function expression would usually have a name after the function keyword. So just like we were doing up here, we had function, add, function, stop var. So it usually has a name after the function keyword. But in this case, we don't need two names. So we can just go straight into the function. And this is called an anonymous function. Okay, so I can get rid of this. Okay, however, it's not truly anonymous because we did give it a name over here. Okay, so these are what we call function expressions. And yeah, okay, we've opened and closed our curly braces, perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the same kind of stuff we've been doing. Let's add here. So we can just copy and paste this. And we're just going to say num1 and num2 and pass those in as our parameters. Okay. So if I console log the function down here, whoops. Okay, let's make sure it's working. Console.log. We'll just copy and paste this. This is why you don't give functions super long names because then it's really annoying to call them. Okay, and let's pass something into those parameters. So 4 and 5. Okay, so if we clear, save, and run, we should get 9. Okay? All right, so why do all of this work to confuse ourselves? Why write all of these extra steps? Well, it's because when we have a function that's housed inside of a variable, we can actually use it in a more compact way. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more tomorrow with callbacks and higher order functions, but just understand that there's a purpose why we're doing this. There's like a method to our madness. Okay, so you can see that each day it's going to kind of build off the last. So I'm going slow today because like everything we're doing here, it's really important for what we're learning the rest of the week. So what we're doing today, these are the foundations. So for today, I just want you to get used to seeing this and calling it what it is, which is a function expression. So function expressions allow us to do something even more unique, and that is create an arrow function. So arrow functions, they're derived from function expressions, and arrow functions are becoming much more popular in syntax and usage. So arrow functions are syntax of what we call ES6, and just like HTML5 is like the latest version of HTML, ES6 would be the latest version of JavaScript, and that's ECMAScript 6. Okay, so let's see one of these things in action. So I'm going to write it down here. I'm going to say const, I'm going to give it a shorter name, arrow test, okay, equals, and we'll just write it out like we've been writing out functions. So equals function, num1, num2, okay, and then we're going to return num1 plus num2, okay? So let me comment this out, and we're just going to console.log 2 and 3. Okay, clear, save, run, and we should get 5. Num1 plus num2. What did I do wrong here? Return num1 plus num2. Save, run. Const arrow test equals function num1 plus 2, num1 plus num2. Does anyone see an error here? Why it would be returning? Call arrow test. Yep, thank you. Console.log, yeah, you actually have to call the function name. Arrow test, it's Monday. 2, 3. All right, so now it should work. Save, run. Now I should get 5. Awesome, thank you. All right, so before we wanted to turn it into an arrow function, we just wanted to make sure that it's working correctly, and it is. So thank you. I needed to invoke the function. I also need another cup of coffee. Okay, so now I want to convert this into a function expression. This function expression, I want to convert it into an arrow function. So let me show you what that looks like, because it's pretty easy. So basically, we can delete the function keyword. Okay. And we add what is called a fat arrow to the end of the parentheses. Okay. So clear, save, run, and it's still working. Okay. And they call this a fat arrow because I'm assuming that would be a skinny arrow. So these are called arrow functions or fat arrow functions, and that is why. Okay, so that's it. That's the simplest conversion we can do, okay? So this is ES6, or the latest version of JavaScript, so you're probably gonna see these a lot more, like in your future and as your careers progress. But you should know how to write function expressions without arrow functions, and you should know how to write function declarations because you might be working at a company that doesn't use ES6. So you should be comfortable with all of these, okay? There's a lot more that we can do with this. We can actually remove the return keyword and the curly brackets. But we're not going to do that right now. So I just wanted to show you that arrow functions can go much deeper. And I'm actually going to give you some documentation on how arrow functions work. But we're not going to get too deep with arrow functions just for today. Okay, we're just touching the basics right now. So here's some documentation here on how arrow functions work. All right. And an arrow function expression is a syntactically compact alternative to a regular function expression. So for today, that's all you really need to know. All right. Okay, so arrow function recap. Let's see how to do that one more time. So basically, we just remove the function keyword and we add the fat arrow at the end here, okay? So that's it. That's the simplest conversion. So that's all we need to know for today. All right, so I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna take a couple more questions and then I'll give you another break before we get into objects. Okay, so redeclare makes a new variable and reassign just changes the value in an existing variable. Exactly, yes. That is a very good way to put it. Okay, how do we know when to use a function keyword over an arrow function? At your company, they'll tell you what to use. And I believe in today's afternoon project as well, you'll be told like when to just use a function expression and when to use an arrow function. But arrow functions are becoming more popular. Like these are becoming the standard. It's just that not everyone has caught up to ES6 yet. All right, speak, console.log speak. Do I need both? No. So here in this console.log, you're invoking the function. Okay, good question. How to type in the arrow function? I don't know what you mean by that. Can we go over today's project? Yes, we will go over today's project at the end of this guided project, so don't worry too much about that. We will definitely take the time to do that. All right, I'm gonna give you a 5-minute break. Step away from your computer and I'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, WEB23, welcome back. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is objects. And you've probably heard that everything in JavaScript is an object. You may have heard that from videos. You may have heard that from articles. This is true. We're going to be talking about what that really means in the coming days. But for now, I want you to understand what an object is. And in a lot of ways, objects are just fancy variables. So they're just ways that we can store more information. So let's start with object literals. Okay, and that means we are literally writing an object instead of inheriting it, inheriting from it abstractly. Okay, so let's write our first object. So I'm going to call this object const dog, and I'm going to set it equal to something. So everything up into this point looks like a variable. That's why we spent so much time on variables, to really understand that syntax. But here's where things get a little different, okay? So we've added strings to the right side of variables, we've added numbers, we've added functions. So now we're gonna add a block of code, okay? So this is the first step to creating my object. Awesome. When we do this, it's often called an object literal, and that just means that we must follow the rules of what an object is. Okay, so every object has two portions. The top part has key value pairs, or what we call properties, and the bottom part holds functions, which we call methods in an object. So the anatomy of an object. So we'll say the first part is key value pairs, and we call these object properties. And the next part is functions of the object, and we call those methods. Okay? So let's see how these things work. So a key value pair is a pair of data. So on the left side, we have something like name, and on the right side, we can give it a name. And instead of a semicolon in CSS, I'm going to use a comma. So for example, name, and I'm going to set this string to Ada, which is my dog's name, okay? So the comma is basically saying, and I want to do something else. So I want to do something else, just like in our parameters. So I'm going to add some different key value pairs here. I'm going to add breed, and we'll say Bolly dog. Okay, I'm going to add color. And I'll say brindle. Okay, I'm going to add weight. We'll say 45 pounds. And I'm going to add age. Okay, and I can just give this a number. Okay. The second portion is what really makes an object literal special, and that's a function. Okay, so that's called the method when it's housed inside of an object. So I'm going to make a function called eat, and here I can use the function keyword as an anonymous function. So here I'm going to say eat, and I'm going to set that to a function. And open some more curly braces, and I'm going to return a string. So I'm going to return likes to eat steak. Okay. Awesome. So I can add more functions here just by putting a comma at the end of this function. But let's see how this works. So just like console.log, console is an object and .log is a method. So it logs arguments to the console. So we can use that dot notation. So we're going to say dog because that's the name of our object. And then we're going to use that dot syntax, so that dot notation, as a way of accessing these values inside here on the left side of our colon. Okay, so this is our assignment operator here. All right, so let's try and get her name. So I'm going to say console.log, and we're going to say dog.name. Okay, so before I run anything, what do you think is going to show up here? So what is going to show up in my console? So let me put a thread in here. So what's going to show up here in my console when I run this? Yeah, perfect, her name. So clear, save, run, Ada. Awesome, it's working. Okay, so here, are we invoking dog or are we referencing dog? Like, what do you think? Are we invoking it or are we referencing it? I'm gonna add another thread here. What do you think? Some people are saying reference. Does anyone think we're invoking it? A lot of people are saying referencing. Okay, yeah, so if you said referencing, that's right. We are referencing it, but we'll call something inside of this dog soon. So let's borrow that console.log so we can see our reference. So we've borrowed this console.log, we've added dog.name, so we're referencing our dog here, and we can see our reference here in the console. And I can do this for any piece of data that I want to get. So I can say dog.breed, clear, save, run, and then her breed will show up as well. Okay, so these are like super variables. They can hold an infinite amount of properties and an infinite amount of methods. Okay. So if I wanted to invoke that function, or I wanted to invoke that method, how do you think I would do that? So I'm going to put a thread in here. How do you think I would invoke this function in the console and get it to show up in the console? So can I just say eat? Okay, some people are saying dog. Can I just do it this way? Can I just say dog.eat? No? What am I missing? Parentheses. Okay, so let's clear, save, and run. And dog.eat returns a function, an entire function, right? It returns this, but what if I just wanted to get this return statement? Then I would need those parentheses, okay? So I'm gonna clear, save, run, likes to eat steak. So we can see that those parentheses, they matter, okay? So these invocation parentheses, they matter big time. If I put the difference between the invoking and the referencing, so when I asked you earlier, like, am I invoking this or am I referencing dog? The difference is the parentheses. So when we have the parentheses, we're invoking. If we take the parentheses away, we're just referencing. So we're just saying, what is eat? So in this case, we're just referencing that eat. Oop, I'm missing a bracket. There we go. Eat. Perfect. Save, run. Okay, so in this case, we're referencing eat and it's returning that entire function to us. But if we wanted to invoke eat, then we need those parentheses. Save, run. Okay, so that's the difference between referencing and invoking. All right, so like I said, we can put more methods here. So I'm gonna add another method called chase, and I'm gonna set it to a function, and I'm going to return another string, and I'm gonna say likes to chase squirrels. Okay. So now I can do that same thing here, and I need those parentheses to call or to invoke chase. So clear, save, run, likes to chase squirrels. All right, awesome. We're running out of time, but I do want to give you a chance to try one of these on your own. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. I'm not going to put you into breakout groups. I just want you to try this on your own. Create an object with your favorite pet or your favorite animal. Give it 4 key value pairs. Give it 3 or 4 key value pairs. Give it one method and then invoke the method. Okay, so let me just put 3 minutes up on the clock here. I just want you to have a chance to try this on your own. So go ahead. The instructions are in Slack. All right, you're probably still working on these. You have about 30 seconds left. I'm gonna pop a thread in here if you're finished. Copy and paste those objects into this thread. Show me your objects. Your objects with the method invoked. Awesome. Great, they're looking good. Perfect. So when you are finished, please pop your object in that thread. I want to see everyone's objects. Okay, I'm gonna look up some documentation here for objects because I want to show you how I would Google something in JavaScript if I didn't know what it was. So I would probably type object, JavaScript, MDN, okay? If I just type object, it's probably not going to give me the results I'm looking for. Like this is defining the word object for me. That's not what I'm looking for. So you need to be a bit more specific when you're Googling for these things. So object, JavaScript, MDN. And then if I click on this, now I can read through what an object is. And you'll notice here that it lists properties first and then different methods. Okay? So I don't want to spend any more time on objects. We still have to get through arrays. We've got about 15 minutes left. If we go over into the lunch break, don't worry, just bear with me. You can always take a couple of extra minutes after the break so that you still, or after lunch so that you still get an hour. So don't fret, but I do think that this is important and I want to make sure that I'm spending some time on each thing. Okay, so arrays is the next thing that we're going to talk about. Okay, and arrays are basically just fancy, well, basically we've been talking about fancy ways to hold information. So we talked about var, let, and const. We talked about ways to protect that information inside of a block of scope using functions. We talked about function expressions and arrow functions. And then we talked about properties and methods inside of objects. So using functions inside of objects. So arrays is the next thing I want to talk about. And they're one of the biggest fundamental pieces for holding information. So think of an array as an array of information. So with arrays, we can store lots of values in a different way than we store values with objects and object literals. So I'm going to create an array with a list of my favorite cities. So I'm going to say const cities, and I'm going to set that equal. And in this case, I'm going to use square brackets. So this is something we haven't seen before. So when you see square brackets, I want you to think array, okay? So what is an array? It stores information, and the important thing to note about an array is order. So the order in which things are brought in. So I'm going to list my favorite cities. So Tel Aviv, Cape Town, and this is the order in which I like them, okay? New York, let's say Kigali, okay, Istanbul, okay, and we'll say Lisbon. Okay, so this is an array of my favorite cities in the order in which I like them. All right, so let's console log cities and see what this looks like. Okay, so save, run, and we've got our array that appears here in the console, okay? And it looks exactly like we have inside of this array. So what's special about this is that the computer has assigned a position for each of these inputs, and that position starts at 0. So Tel Aviv is at 0, and let's count them. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items in the array. But if you tried to take the length of the 6th item, we wouldn't have a 6th item because this starts at 0. So this is assigned 0, this is assigned 1, this is assigned 2, 3, 4, and 5, even though there's 6 items in the array. So that can be a bit confusing. So I just wanted to make note of that. Okay, so why does this matter? Because we can access anything inside of our array using our array syntax. So remember that arrays have square brackets, and inside of these, we can actually tell them which item to grab. So I'm going to I'll comment this out, and I'm going to make another console log down here. So I'm going to console.log cities, square brackets, 0. Okay, and I'm going to pop a thread in here. What do you think it's going to return to me in the console? Perfect, yeah. So if I clear, save, and run, you can see that my first value is returned to me in the console. And I can do this for each of the values. So I can copy and paste this 6 times, 4, 5, 6, and I can change this to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is the confusing part. There's 6 items, but they only go up to the value of 5 because the first item is given the value of 0. So we're going to save and run. And now I've got all of my cities listed out for me. Okay? All right. So this is cool, but why are arrays valuable? So let's go back to that MDN documentation. We can say arrays in JavaScript, MDN. Okay, so look at all of these properties and all of these methods that we can assign to arrays. So these are things that are built in, and we can do so many cool things with data. So we're going to get to prototype on Wednesday, but for now we're just going to look at length, which is the property that we've been, well, we haven't been using that yet here. So let's see a city, or let's see a example of that. So I'm going to comment all of this stuff out, and let's see an example of that. So if I console.log cities.length, okay, think for a minute what you think it's going to return here. So we're going to clear this, save, and run. And it returned 6 because there's 6 items in our array. So why do you think this is helpful to us? Let me pop a thread here in WEB23. Like, how is this helpful to us? Why do we care how big an array is? Yeah, loops. Awesome. So it's useful in loops, and it defines our bounds for loops. Okay? So what if I did something like this? Console.log cities.length minus 1. Okay. What do you think this will return? What will this return here in the console? 5. Do you think it will return the number 5, or do you think it will return whatever the last item in my array is? Okay, let's see. We're going to save and run. And it returned the number 5. Okay, so it gives us that last, that number 5. Yeah, we need the parentheses if we want the last item in the array. Okay. So if we wanted to return Lisbon, we would have to do it like this. And our square bracket goes here. So now clear, save, run. And now it returns Lisbon. So we need those square brackets if we want the last item in the array. Otherwise, it's just going to return us a number. Okay, so I'm going to give you this array cheat sheet that might be helpful for some of the things that you're doing this day, today with today's project. So let me give you that cheat sheet. And you might want to spend a minute going through some of these things. So if you needed to know how to create an array, it tells you an example here. Let's go back to copy specific items. There's like reverse an array, remove several items, remove a single item, overwrite an item. So there's lots of different things that we can do with arrays here, and you're gonna find this really helpful today. So keep this cheat sheet open when you are working on your afternoon projects today, okay? All right. Okay, let's practice quickly. We've only got 5 minutes left. Okay, I wanted to give you time to practice writing an array, but you will get lots of time this afternoon. So I'm going to use this last 5 minutes to go through today's project with you. Okay, so we'll click on JavaScript 1. And the first thing you want to do is you want to come and you want to read this README document. So that's really important. Make sure you're reading this README document. Okay, if we click into the assignment and we click on that index.html, so all of those script files that you're going to be working out of, they're being called in here. And you're going to actually have to open up your console and check your work in the console. So script tags usually go below, or sorry, just above the closing body tag. But in this case, it doesn't matter where they are. So the reason why it usually goes above the closing body tag is because we want to load all of our HTML onto the page before we start loading our JavaScript. In this case, there's no HTML on the page, so it really doesn't matter if it's in the head of the document or before the closing body tag. Okay, so don't worry too much about where these script tags are loaded today. Just know that we're calling in all of these other documents that we're working out of. So arrays.js, for example, this is your array that you're working with today. And we're gonna go down here and you're gonna read the challenges. Okay, I'm gonna give you this because I think that this is really, really, really important today. It's Polya's problem-solving techniques. And today is like the first day that you're truly doing some problem solving, okay? So the first part is understand the problem. And I actually think that might be the hardest thing you do today is understand what the challenge or the question is actually asking of you. So try to just define that in plain English. Then you're gonna devise a plan. So I would even write that out in pseudocode. So for example, I want to return this last value. So I would say like return last value in words. I'd want to be really specific. So not the number. Okay, and before I wrote my code, I would probably write this out in plain English and like make a plan and really think about what I was gonna do. Okay, so it might be confusing today to start to do some of these problems, but this problem solving technique, it's going to make you a better developer in the long run. So it might be frustrating for today, but the first thing you want to do is understand the problem, then you're going to devise a plan, and then you're actually going to write the code. You're going to carry out the plan, and then you're going to review your code. Okay, and did this actually solve what you were expecting it to solve? Like, did the code do what you were expecting it to do? Is your problem solved? Is there still other steps you need to take? So that's when you're going to review the plan there, okay? Let's do a couple final questions and then I'll let you go for lunch. How do you comment out multiple lines at the same time? Good question. You use like the CSS comments like we did up here. You can also just like highlight it and hit Command ? And that should comment out your lines as well, okay? Can you use function declarations in an object method, or are anonymous functions always better? So I wouldn't use a function declaration in an object method because where is our object? Let's go back up to our objects. So we're giving it a name here. So I wouldn't say function eat here because like there's no point in repeating that eat twice. You're just kind of being redundant at that point. Let me uncomment this so you can see it a little better. Okay, so we're saying eat here, and then we're giving it an anonymous function, but I don't need to say function eat here. Like there's no point in putting that word twice. So I hope that makes more sense to you now. All right. Sorry for bringing up mutation again, but given your const dog example in CodePen, if we add a run method to dog, doesn't that mutate the const, which is immutable? No. So I think I know who this is, and I saw you posted an article. I'm trying to keep things really simple for today. So I understand that you might have some JavaScript experience, and you might want to get into like the technicalities. And if you want to discuss this after the lecture, I'm totally open to that. But let's not try to confuse everyone else who is seeing this for the first time. And for the purposes of today, const is immutable, okay? How can we check if our console logs are going through correctly? If your console logs are working correctly, then you will see what you are logging in the console. If they're not working correctly, then they won't show up here and you're gonna get some sort of error. So that is how you see if your console logs are working correctly. And in the browser, it's that inspect and then console. And then this is where you'll see all of your console logs, okay? Awesome. Yeah, perfect. We just went over today's project. Awesome. How do we use the .length feature? Sometimes to count the number of alphabets in words and sometimes to count the number of words in an array. So we just did a demonstration of that length feature, okay? So if you just want the number or like how big the array is, it's just that cities .length, so the array name .length, but then we can also pull different pieces of information out using that .length, okay? Awesome. Can the functions in the object be turned to arrow functions? They can. So you can turn a function in an object to an arrow function, yes. And to do that, how do we do that again? Does anyone know? How would we turn this into an arrow function? I'm just gonna pop a thread in here really quickly. Explain to me in words how I would turn this into an arrow function. Anyone wanna give that a try? What do you think? Right, we're getting some replies now. Yep, delete the function keyword and add an arrow. Perfect. So I delete the function keyword here, and I'd add an arrow here. Okay? So you can turn these into arrow functions. Good question. All right, go enjoy your lunch. Make sure you take a break. Come back and give the afternoon project a try. So I will see you all tomorrow.